All rise. This Common Pleas Court in and for Montgomery County, State of Ohio is now in session with the Honorable Denise Cross presiding.
You may be seated. Good afternoon and welcome to the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court. I am Denise Cross, the presiding judge of the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court, and on behalf of all of the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court judges and staff, we want to thank you for being here for this investiture ceremony. Today, the oath of office of the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court will be administered to Robert G. Hansman. It is my pleasure to relinquish the courtroom this afternoon and recognize Attorney Ronald J. Kozar.
Thank you, Your Honor, and may it please the court. Judges, Hansman family, honored guests, and ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Michael DeWine, Governor of Ohio, has ordered that our friend and colleague Bob Hansman be appointed to a seat on the Common Pleas bench of this county to succeed Judge Greg Singer, who has retired. And we've gathered here today to witness the investiture, the giving of the oath, and the robing of Bob in fulfillment of Governor DeWine's order. We wish to thank Judge Mary Montgomery for lending us the use of this courtroom, her courtroom, for this important occasion today. And we also wish to thank you, Your Honor, Judge Denise Cross, for taking time from your duties as presiding judge of the entire Common Pleas Court system in this county to be with us on this important occasion. For those of you who don't know me, I am Ron Kozar. I'm an attorney here in Dayton. My practice involves many of the same things that Bob's practice has involved over the years, and so we've gotten to know each other quite well as colleagues and increasingly as friends, sometimes as opposing counsel, sometimes as co-counsel on the same cases, but always as friends. And so when Bob asked me to serve as the MC and facilitator for today's proceedings, I was very happy and proud to accept that invitation. We have in our presence today a number of judges, and I would like to recognize each one of them by name before we get any further into the proceedings. When I would like to name each one of you, and when I do, if you can perhaps wave a hand or give a nod to let people who don't know others know what names to connect with what faces, we'd be grateful. And I'll start with you, Judge Montgomery, Judge Mary Montgomery of the Common Pleas Court. Seated beside Judge Montgomery is Judge Helen Wallace of the Juvenile Division of the Common Pleas Court. Seated beside her is Judge Greg Singer, whose seat will be filled in the course of the afternoon. Judge Mary Donovan of the Court of Appeals of the Second Appellate District. Judge Susan Solly of the Common Pleas Court. Judge Tim O'Connell of the Common Pleas Court. Seated in front of Judge O'Connell is Judge Ron Lewis of the Court of Appeals. Seated beside him, Judge Stephen Wolliver, who in his visiting capacity has been helping us take care of things over the last month or two, but whose duties used to be in the Greene County Common Pleas Court. Seated beside him, Judge David Brannon of the Probate Division of the Common Pleas Court. Judge Chris Epley of the Court of Appeals of the Second Appellate District. and Judge Jeff Wellbaum of the 2nd Appellate District. Seated in the corner is who you'll be hearing more from later, is Judge Kate Huffman of the Common Pleas Court and soon to be of the Court of Appeals. We thank all of you judges for joining us and being with us today, and indeed we thank all of the public officials, elected officials, and other dignitaries who've taken the time to honor us today with their presence. We will now proceed, may it please the court, with an invocation. Leading us in the invocation will be Reverend Dr. George McConnell of the Westminster Presbyterian Church. That church is just a couple blocks away from this courthouse, one of our neighbors here in downtown Dayton. Dr. McConnell, who likes to go by the name of Sandy, as I understand, was the pastor at Westminster for 20 years before retiring in 2013. And now, Pastor McConnell, if you'll lead us in prayer, we'd be grateful.
Let us join together in prayer. Almighty God, you sit in judgment to declare what is just and what is right. Bless the courts and the magistrates in our land, and especially today, we ask you to bless Robert G. Hansman, who is to be installed as judge in the Court of Common Pleas for Montgomery County. Give Bob the gift of acute and active listening, the spirit of wisdom and understanding, that he may perceive the truth and administer the law impartially as instruments of your divine will. We pray these things with gratitude for Bob and the vocation you have called him to serve. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. McConnell. We will now be hearing from Jim Dyer. James A. Dyer is one of the leading trial attorneys here in Dayton. He's a graduate of the Duke University School of Law and one of the founders of the law firm of Siebele, Shillitoe, and Dyer, LLP. He has been one of the leaders of the litigation department of that firm for decades, and it was Jim's firm that hired Bob Hansman many years ago, and it's from Jim's firm that Governor DeWine has chosen our next judge. So with that, and may it please the court, I will yield the floor to Jim Dyer.
Thank you so much, Ron. Your Honor, judges, it's great to be here together with all of you, guests, family. I'm just grateful that Bob, at times I think he thought he had the courage to ask me to speak today, but I have known Bob for over 20 years as a friend and colleague, and I feel well qualified to talk about the awesome responsibility that Bob is about to undertake and his qualifications for that investment of judicial power that and the burden that comes with that, as many of our colleagues at the bench already shoulder. Bob is ready for this, and I think it'll be pretty clear pretty quickly, not surprisingly, on an occasion like this, that Bob is made of the right judicial timber to be an outstanding judge in this county. And as practitioners, we're going to welcome him along with our other colleagues on the bench, and we look forward to that. I want to spend just a little time telling you who in the world is this guy, Bob Hansman. And then I want to spend a little time talking about why, in a little more detail, why I think Bob is going to be just an outstanding colleague to those who are with us today, that are already on the bench, and a great addition to our bench here in Montgomery County. So who is this guy that's been my friend and colleague for 20 years? Bob, some would say that he's an Air Force brat. His mom and dad are here today, and his dad served proudly in the Air Force as Bob was growing up. I don't think Bob would probably accept that title, and I think there's good reason for that. As Bob and I talked over his youth growing up, he was followed, obviously, his family followed his dad's assignments around the country at various bases and even overseas. And I think what Bob would tell you is that experience growing up really sharpened the steel, made him appreciate and love the diversity of the melting pot of people from all walks of life that he met and became friends with and were part of his youth growing up. Bob graduated from The Ohio State University undergrad with a degree in journalism and journalism and political science. I might say Ron's kind introduction of me being a Duke grad, he should have said I'm a proud but very sad Duke grad after the NCAA events. But Bob went on from graduating at OSU in 1992 to get his degree from George Washington University as an attorney, and shortly thereafter went into the Air Force and proudly served his country from 1996 to 2001 as a judge advocate, general judge advocate officer, I think is the way it's referred to in the Air Force. During that time, had some magnificent experiences that shaped him well for the job that he's been called to do here today. He separated from the Air Force as a captain in 2001. If we were talking to an Air Force recruiter, they would tell you that the pursuit of justice is a key aspect of every Air Force objective for all men and women who serve our country in that branch of the service. As a judge advocate general, Bob certainly learned and was dogged in his pursuit of justice, particularly with the calling of being an attorney in the Air Force. He was a prosecutor at many court-martials, and also, and some of us don't realize this, it's true at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and here in our federal courts in Dayton, Bob also served as a prosecutor for dozens of federal cases where folks were arrested for allegedly violating some criminal statute on a military base where Bob was stationed, but they weren't subject to the Code of Military Justice. And then Bob would lead the prosecution in federal court. He had great experience in his prosecutor's side working in the Air Force. Bob's best accomplishment in the Air Force, he'd probably tell you, was meeting Leah, his wife, in 1999. They were both Air Force officers, and maybe it was actually earlier than that. You were married in 1999, but in any event, Bob's going to tell you more about Leah and his three wonderful children, Audrey and Melanie. Did I get that right? Melanie, and Avery. Bob's going to introduce them to you and tell you more about his incredible family. I know you all, as looking at Bob as your husband or your dad, are as proud of him today as the rest of us are in seeing him jump to the bench. So why will Bob be a great judge? Just a couple of things I want to say about that through the lens of a couple of cases that Bob and I worked on over the years. You know, 2,400 years ago, the great Greek philosopher Socrates, amazingly, a guy who was executed at the end of the day after a trial, had this to say about judges: 4 characteristics that make a great judge, and I think Bob eminently satisfies all 4 of these criteria that Socrates laid out. To hear courteously, to answer wisely, to consider soberly, and to decide impartially. And I want to tell you a little bit about Bob through the lens of a couple of cases we worked on to give you some peek at why I think Bob and Socrates would have gotten along really well had the circumstances in the 2,400 years been a little different. The first case I want to tell you about, Judge Wiseman, if she were here, would know well. She had some experience with it before she went on the bench. It's called the Christmas tree light case. And Kevin Bowman, I see sitting in the audience, was also involved in that case many years ago. We were working on it. We had an inventor who had invented a string of Christmas tree lights that stayed lit, even if the vexing problem, I'm sounding like my opening statement again, the vexing problem of lights being broken or loose or jostled or defective came out of the socket, the rest of the string stayed lit. Now in 2002 or 2003, that was great technology. And a competitor knocked off our marketing materials and our packaging and some of our logos, and that didn't sit well with our local Dayton inventor that had invented stay-lit Christmas tree lights. So we were engaged to go after this competitor. A lawyer in our firm unexpectedly left, and shortly after Bob had joined the firm, he was welcomed to us by handing him a file, which was almost needed a forklift to get it to him in the short time that had been going, and saying to Bob, gee, here's the file. There are 4 depositions, maybe 4 or 5, that need to be taken in 3 days in Hong Kong. Let us know how it goes. Amazingly, Bob stayed with us, didn't run out the door, and learned the case on the plane flying over to Hong Kong, took some incredible depositions with maybe a little bit of help from his friends, but Bob was essentially on his own. Those depositions he took under that circumstance ended up really proving to be the basis for the winning cross-examination that we prevailed at a preliminary injunction hearing. I think that says a lot about Bob's qualities as a judge. Fearless, adaptable, quick intellect. I mean, all of those are characteristics and qualities that are represented by those who are on the bench now and that Bob will carry with him onto the bench. And we saw it demonstrated quite well in that case. Another aspect of that case that was memorable and also says something about Bob's qualifications, Bob came to me one day and said something to the effect of, I don't think their expert is telling the truth about his background. Now, this is a guy who Bob had to learn electricity, by the way, on the way over to Hong Kong, too, which is part of the case. So no small task, but he said, I just don't think this expert, who was an expert in electricity, was telling the truth. Lo and behold, some of his colleagues thought perhaps Bob was barking up the wrong tree, but we let him go. He was dogged in pursuing that. And wouldn't you know it, Bob turned up the evidence that showed that the PhD of this expert was totally phony. Back in the day, it was a non-existent university with a website. That expert, after Bob finished cross-examining in the morning, he actually hadn't finished. It was still open. We broke for lunch. The expert suddenly became ill, got on a plane and disappeared and has never come back to Dayton, best we can tell since. Needless to say, Bob's work on that matter showed really a tenacity that I think at getting to the truth. And despite some questions from his colleagues, Bob was just dogged in his pursuit of that, and it turned out to be true. And that tenacious seeking of the truth, I think, will serve him well also on the bench. The second case I want to tell you a little bit about that I think says a lot about Bob's qualifications for the bench. Bob and I were privileged to be appointed as special attorney generals by then Attorney General Betty Montgomery to serve to represent the Ohio State Superintendent of Public Instruction. At that time, in the early 2000s, Dayton had been under a federal supervision of its public schools for over 30 years. Dayton was the last community in the state of Ohio that had a busing order. And the state asked Bob and I to determine if there was evidence to demonstrate that it was time for the supervision of the Dayton Public Schools to end and to transfer that supervision back where we believed it belonged with the Dayton Board of Education. We filed what's called a motion for unitary status, teeing the matter up with Judge Rice. Judge Rice encouraged, as only he can do, to the parties to settle the matter and to try and come hand in hand to support a motion for unitary status. So we were simultaneously gathering the evidence to prove that the school system had met the constitutional benchmarks which was, regardless of settlement, needed to be proved. And at the same time, we were working on a settlement between the NAACP, the Dayton School Board, and the state of Ohio. We were really worked with some lions in our community. Jesse Gooding, who a longtime member, served as the president of the NAACP local chapter. Taylor Jones, his able counsel. Dwight Washington served as counsel for the Dayton School Board. And then Bob and I served as counsel for the state of Ohio. Judge Rice appointed John Garland, who at that time he was an attorney, but he was also president of Central State, as the mediator. He locked us in a room, put a plaque in the middle of the table that said, "The buck stops here." And he looked at us on that first day and said, "You're not leaving." And he seriously locked the door on the first day. Said, "You're not leaving. You all have an obligation to the community, to the school system, to the children of this community, to try and arrive at a deal that is good for all of those constituencies." We didn't settle it that day, and he did finally unlock the door. But negotiations continued for a long period of time. They were tough. We were trying to come up with funding for the Dayton Public Schools going forward that would put them in a great position as they launched off on not having any money coming in from the state. And at the end of the day, we reached a deal. It was a tremendous feeling, and it's really the pinnacle of my career of 40 years practicing law, to exchange hugs with all of our adversaries. And it's a little foggy, but I think Judge Rice may have even joined in as we put the final deal together in his conference room. When that case was over, I think it really showed to me, through Bob's assistance in that case, that the buck stops here was a mentality that he adopted, and that not only did that work in that case with John Garland's able wisdom and guidance, but it really is a philosophy that I think Bob has followed in his career, working through hundreds of cases with us and his clients. I think that's going to serve him really well on the bench. Bob is fearless, and also knows at the end of the day a decision needs to be made. That case resulted in the state of Ohio paying the school system about $30 million. And while here we are 20 years later, I haven't heard anybody comment on how that affected the schools as they stand today. But what I do know is that it was time for federal supervision to end in a 30-year-old busing case, and collectively that was achieved. I think that Bob bringing that same mindset to the bench will serve him well. In closing, I want to tell you a little bit about, switch gears just a little bit, although it's still an important characteristic for a judge, I think, and that's Bob's humility. My mama, God rest her soul, always told me that character is what you do when nobody's looking. Now, some of you have probably had that same advice from your parents or trusted adults. I want to give you a little example of something Bob did that, frankly, I just stumbled upon 2 nights ago that I knew nothing about 20 years ago, but it's the kind of thing that says a lot about who Bob is. After that long negotiation in the Dayton desegregation case, Dwight Washington, who was a dear friend, a wonderful attorney, and was taken much too young in 2016 from the bar when he passed. But Dwight was known, I think his obituary, if I recall right, even said he was a friend to everybody. Well, that was not quite true. Dwight was a great lawyer and a great human being, but Dwight was a tiger when it came to protecting the interest of his clients. And in that case, that desegregation case, Dwight was clawed. I won't say he bit, but metaphorically clawed, roared, scratched, did everything he had to protect his client. There were some long and very tough negotiations that went on. There were days we walked away so angry at Dwight and his client that I wasn't sure we were coming back the next day. And I'm sure Dwight felt the same way about us. Sometimes Bob and I walked away so angry at each other, I'm sure we could both be in the same room. It was that kind of set of negotiations that went on for a couple of weeks. The other night I stumbled upon a letter that Bob wrote to Dwight Washington, this What You Do When Nobody's Looking, dated April 19th, 2002. Now that the Goodwine versus Taft case has come to an end, I just want to take a moment to tell you what a pleasure it was to work with you over the past year. It's hard to believe how much time that I have spent in your office and the amount of time you have spent here at Sibley, Shillitoe, and Dyer. Through it all, and under great pressure at times, a big understatement, you conducted yourself with admirable professionalism and integrity. I know that I will see you around at various bar-related functions, and my hope is that such contacts are frequent. The bottom line, Bob's just a really decent human being. He's going to be a great addition to the bench. He will treat all people fairly, as you would expect a judge. He will treat all people with respect and dignity, which is such a hallmark and characteristic of our bench that we're so blessed with here in the 2nd Appellate District and in Montgomery County and surrounding counties. At the end of the day, Bob is just well equipped for taking the bench. Bob, Godspeed on your new journey.
Thank you, Jim. We've now reached the point in our proceedings, may it please the court, when we will call Judge Kate Huffman forward and ask Bob and Leah to step forward so that Bob may take the oath and receive the robe of office.
It's okay. I'm going to turn this way so everybody can see you. If you want to raise your right hand, please. Sorry, I have to think about that. I, Robert G. Hansman,
I, Robert G. Hansman,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and the Constitution of Ohio,
and the Constitution of Ohio,
and that I will administer justice
and that I will administer justice
without respect to persons
without respect to persons,
and faithfully and impartially discharge
and patiently and impartially discharge
and perform all duties incumbent upon me
all duties incumbent upon me
as judge of the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court,
as judge of the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court,
General Division,
to
which I have been appointed, according to the best of my ability and understanding.
according to the best of my ability and understanding.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
I present Judge Robert Hansman.
Well, thank you all for coming today. I'm so pleased to see so many familiar faces, as well as faces of people I've recently met during the transition period, and I suspect a few unfamiliar faces that will quickly become very, very familiar to me. I'm so pleased to have today my parents, Bob and Jeannie Hansman, with me, along with my wife of 23 years, Leah, and our children, Audrey, Avery, and Melanie. And I'm so happy that they can be here with us. And my sister Leslie is here too. As I listened to Jim Dyer speak, I thought about the 2 decades that I practiced law with him. And thank you, Jim, for all the kind words. When I began looking for a job in this community, it was the year 2000. My wife and I were both in the Air Force, but we had decided to separate. I wanted to stay in this area. And if you're in the military, you're going to be moved around a lot, especially as an officer. from state to state, even country to country. So we decided we wanted to put down roots. And I had gone to school here. I went to Fairborn High School. This is where I grew up. So this is as good a place as any. In fact, excuse me, a fantastic place to settle down. So I began looking around for a job, but I didn't know anybody in the Dayton legal community. So I started asking lots and lots of questions about the firms and the lawyers and the personalities around here. People gave me a lot of advice. And people told me all about the big firms and what they thought of it and how they were, and some of that advice was even true, actually. I had a couple of offers at the end of the year, and really two offers, kind of boiled down to two offers. And one was a very good firm here in town that we all know, that's over 100 years old, and I have a lot of friends there today. But the other firm was Siebele, Shillito, and Dyer. And the interesting thing to me about the firm at the time was it was not 100 years old. At the time, it was 14 years old. But everybody talked about the firm. It was one of the biggest firms in town. And I looked up the partners and studied them, and I realized that they were on so many boards, and John Siebele was on every arts board in town. And I asked myself, how is it possible that this 14-year-old firm grew so fast and became so integral to the community, the legal community in Dayton, Ohio? And I realized that if I joined that firm, I'd get to actually know the founders, unlike the 100-year-old firm. I'd get to work with the people who started it. They were not only still alive, they were still practicing. And I'd learn a lot, I was sure. So I joined the firm. And I should say that everybody in town had good things to say about the firm, although nobody knew how to pronounce it correctly. So I started at the firm on the second day of 2001. And I like to think I'm a realist, so I thought to myself, well, I hope this works out. But if it doesn't, I'll put in a couple years here, and I'll learn a lot more about the legal community, and I'll eventually find just the right, perfect spot. Over the next few years, though, I realized that I was already at the perfect spot, and that I already had all the fantastic partners that I could ever hope to have. I put in the years as an associate, and I became a partner in 2007. And I have to say, I've never spent a moment of all that time up at night worrying about what my partners are doing. And I know that's not true for every lawyer in town. Lawyers talk, and we all know of people who are having difficulties and all kinds of problems, but it's just been so easy because the people there are so good. It's just the culture of the firm. And I would say that they're professional, and I would define professional in this sense. They're not just good lawyers, although they are. They're professional in a fiduciary sense. They put the interests of their clients above their own. And that's what's so important to me, and that's why I stayed at the firm. So I just want to say I will miss everybody there. It's been a privilege to work with all of you. As I started to think about this new job, this new role, I thought back to all the judges that I've appeared in front of over the years. Judges in this court, judges in the federal court across the street, judges in the bankruptcy court. And we had two just fantastic bankruptcy judges in this community, Tom Waldron and Larry Walter. Larry himself was a former partner at our firm. But I also think back to all the military judges that I appeared in front of. When I joined the military, I was randomly assigned to Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. Shepherd, by dint of being a huge base, not as big as Wright Pat, but bigger in other ways, it was a training base, and every 6 months, the population of the base turned over completely, almost completely. So you always had a few new bad apples coming in. You didn't know who they were yet, but they would show themselves soon enough. So we did very many court-martial cases, assault cases, sexual assault cases, thefts, drug cases, all kinds of cases. And I appeared in front of a lot of judges who rode circuit. Military judges ride circuit, so judges would go all over the southwestern and southeastern, Texas is kind of split, southern United States, and we would try cases in front of a lot of judges. And we also had reserve judges come up from Dallas and Fort Worth, and they were mostly very prominent attorneys from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Some of them were judges in their civilian life as well. And so I got to see so many styles of judges and how judges ran their courtroom and what they put up with and what they didn't put up with. And I learned so much from it. And I did also especially learn, the best judges are the most patient judges. That's just the bottom line. Judges have to take so much information in, and they have to apply so much experience and wisdom, but at the end of the day, they let the trial proceed and they let the facts drip out as they may, and then they're able to make a judgment after that. And I heard a reference before to patience, and that is the hallmark, I believe, of the best judges. Aside from issues of style, I think that what people want from a judge at the bottom line are really two things. They want impartiality and they want fairness. And the word fair is a short word. It's 4 letters, but it contains multitudes. What's fair? And who are you being fair to? I think in the criminal sense, you have to be fair, most of all, to the accused, who's entitled to the presumption of innocence. But if there's a conviction, then fairness expands. You have to be fair to the victim of a crime. You have to be fair to the family of the victims. You have to be fair to the community that suffered. So fairness expands. And then at sentencing, there's other considerations that come into effect. And the Ohio Revised Code, 2929.11, gives an outline of the things that you have to consider. You have to consider just plain old punishment. You have to consider protection of the community against further crimes by an individual. You have to consider rehabilitation, if possible. There's all kinds of things you have to consider. And then you have to apply your best wisdom and experience and come up with a sentence. I intend to follow exactly what's in that statute and take it to heart and apply all the considerations within it. I intend to apply and enforce all provisions of the Ohio Revised Code, as well as case law, especially case law as interpreted by our 2nd District Court of Appeals, our Supreme Court of Ohio, and all the legal forebears that have gone before me and have interpreted those laws. I will no doubt have to lean heavily on the collective wisdom of the folks here in the jury box here who have so many years behind them, and seek their advice, and their guidance, their recommendations, and I'll certainly be annoying all of you very shortly. So thank you in advance. I appreciate all of you coming. I want to thank in particular Kim Thomas and Kathy Barnes from our office for doing so much work on this. I want to thank my wife, who not only worked on this, and all this is at very short notice, but who put together the flower arrangements herself that are out in the hallway and up on the judge's dais. And I want to thank the court personnel who've made me feel so welcome, and I look forward to working with all of them. I want to thank especially Governor DeWine for the appointment and for his confidence and faith and the honor of this appointment. And I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank Reverend McConnell, Jim Dyer, and Ron Kozar for their kind words. And thank you both, Judge Cross and Judge Huffman, for your participation in the program today.
Congratulations, Judge. We have now neared the end of our program today. In a moment, Judge Cross is going to adjourn this ceremonial session of our court. And everyone in this room and everyone in the overflow room who is viewing it by video and hearing it through these microphones is going to be welcome out into the hallway for some refreshments and a reception to repeat our congratulations to Judge Hansman. And but before I move to adjourn the proceeding, I'd like to take a moment to recognize some extraordinary people on the court's staff, some great civil servants with whom I have been working this past week or so to help make this ceremony happen. This is a very special week in the history of this court, because there is not only one investiture happening this week, but two. Kim Melnick, who is present in the courtroom, will go through this same process tomorrow and receive the robe and take the oath of office in this very room. All of that pomp and ceremony puts some important people through some serious choreographic pain here in the court, and I want to take a moment to recognize them for the extraordinary efforts they've made to make this all happen so smoothly. And I don't know if she is in the courtroom. Nancy Brookshire, who you see in the back there, has borne the main brunt of my repeated calls with last-minute changes, so thank you, Nancy. Val Turner, who is seated in front of Judge Cross, has helped us with some last-minute hysterics involving the positioning of chairs and podiums in this room. And Heidi Adams, who has been for some time Judge Singer's bailiff and will now succeed to those same duties for Judge Hansman, was an immense help over this past week. Michael Barty, who is not in the room, but I know he can hear me and see me because he's the fellow who coordinates all this video mumbo-jumbo that will help us all to remember this. And Brandon Johnson is a fellow who actually risked life and limb to change the lens in that camera and to do some other physical things and infrastructure things that none of us notice as we see them, but which we would notice had they not been done. So our thanks to those 5 people in particular, and indeed to the entire staff of this court. With that, Judge Cross, may it please the court, we have no need to proceed further. I would move that these proceedings be closed.
The court is now in recess.